Let me begin with something that I think is both the most immediately recognizable and the most consistently underestimated sign of genuine narcissistic love. Because when we talk about what a narcissist cannot do when they are truly in love, we are talking about the specific places where the extraordinary, highly practiced, extraordinarily effective management system that the narcissistic false self operates begins in ways that are subtle, involuntary, and impossible to fully prevent to fail. And the first and most foundational place where that failure becomes visible is in the performance of imperviousness. The narcissist's relationship with imperviousness is not simply a behavioral strategy. It is a psychological identity. The sense of being genuinely unaffected by other people, of existing in a relational environment that moves around you without genuinely moving you, that makes claims on your attention and your response without reaching the deeper interior territory where genuine vulnerability lives, is not simply a pose the narcissist adopts for strategic purposes. It is, for many narcissists, the closest thing to a felt experience of safety that their psychological architecture makes available. The imperviousness is not the armor. For the narcissist, the imperviousness has become so thoroughly integrated into their experience of themselves that it is indistinguishable from their identity. They are not someone pretending to be unaffected. They experience themselves as genuinely unaffected, until genuine love makes that experience impossible to sustain. To understand why genuine love specifically produces this failure of imperviousness when so many other relational experiences do not, we need to return to something foundational about what genuine love actually does to the narcissistic psychological system. The developmental psychiatrist Daniel Siegel, whose interpersonal neurobiology framework gave us the most integrative understanding available of how significant relational experience actually changes the brain's structural organization, showed us that genuine relational significance, the specific quality of emotional investment that makes another person genuinely matter, rather than simply be useful, produces neurological changes that operate at a level considerably deeper than the behavioral management systems that the narcissistic psychology deploys to maintain its surface presentation of imperviousness. What this means in practical terms is that the narcissist who has developed genuine love for someone has, at a neurological level, been changed by that love in ways that their behavioral management system was not designed to accommodate and cannot fully compensate for. The other person's emotional states, their physical presence or absence, their responses and their silences, and the specific quality of their attention, all of it registers in narcissist's neural architecture with an intimacy and a depth that the imperviousness performance was built to prevent. And what it registers as is genuine affect, genuine response, the specific, involuntary, neurologically encoded quality of being actually moved by another person's reality that is the most basic definition of genuine love available. The philosopher Blaise Pascal observed, with a precision that has never been improved upon, that the heart has reasons that reason does not know. What Pascal was pointing toward is precisely the phenomenon we are examining, the way in which genuine feeling operates according to a logic that is not accessible to or controllable by the rational, managed, strategically deployed dimensions of the self. The narcissist management system is a product of reason, of the deliberate, practiced, continuously refined strategic intelligence that the false self employs to maintain its presentation. But the effect that genuine love produces operates in Pascal's territory, in the territory of the heart's reasons. And in that territory, the management system's considerable power simply does not reach. The traces of genuine affecting are everywhere, once you know to look for them. In the involuntary quality of attention, in the response to your emotional states that occurs before the suppression system can intercept it, in the specific texture of the moments where the imperviousness simply, quietly, completely fails. Now that we understand how genuine love disrupts the narcissist's performance of imperviousness, producing involuntary traces of real affect that the management system cannot entirely suppress or erase, I want to examine something that operates at the level of the relationship's most defining and most painful structural pattern. Because the imperviousness we examined in our opening is a moment-to-moment phenomenon. A continuous, low-level failure of the performance that genuine love introduces into the narcissist's ordinary emotional management. What I want to examine now is something that operates at the level of the relationship's larger architecture. Something that genuine love disrupts not moment to moment, but cycle by cycle. The devaluation cannot be sustained, and I want to develop this carefully because I think the significance of this particular disruption is consistently underestimated both by the people who experience it from the inside of a narcissistic relationship and by the clinical frameworks that examine it from the outside. Because the narcissistic cycle idealization, devaluation, discard is so thoroughly documented, so reliably observed, and so consistently present in narcissistic relational patterns that it has come to be understood, in many clinical and popular accounts, as essentially mechanical, as something that proceeds with a predetermined inevitability that genuine feeling cannot meaningfully interrupt. And for relationships in which the narcissist's investment is primarily transactional, this understanding is largely accurate. The cycle proceeds. EA devaluation arrives. It escalates with relatively uncomplicated momentum toward the discard that the cycle's structure produces as its inevitable conclusion, and the person on the receiving end of this progression experiences it as exactly what it is, a systematic, apparently emotionless, almost algorithmically consistent movement through a predetermined relational sequence. But when genuine love is present, something happens to this cycle that the mechanical framework cannot adequately account for. The devaluation begins because the psychological mechanisms that generate it are deeply conditioned and not simply overridden by the presence of feeling, but it cannot maintain its momentum. It stutters, it reverses, it reaches a certain intensity, and then collapses back, not through any conscious decision on the narcissist's part, but through the activation of something that the presence of genuine love has made available that was not available in purely transactional relationships. The psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott, whose concept of the capacity for concern described the developmental achievement of being able to feel genuine care for the impact of one's behavior on another person, rather than simply managing the relational consequences of that behavior, gave us the framework for understanding why genuine love specifically disrupts the devaluation cycle in ways that transactional investment does not. What Winnicott showed us is that the capacity for concern for genuine, felt awareness of how one's behavior affects someone who actually matters is not a fixed trait, but a variable capacity that is activated by the specific conditions of genuine relational investment. In purely transactional relationships, the narcissist's capacity for concern is minimal, not because it is constitutionally absent, but because the conditions that activate it are not present. The person being devalued does not carry sufficient genuine significance to generate the internal experience of concern that would interrupt the devaluation's momentum. But when genuine love is present, when the person being devalued carries real significance, has penetrated beneath the transactional layer to something closer to the narcissist's actual emotional core, the capacity for concern is activated in ways the transactional relationship never reaches. An activated concern is precisely what disrupts the devaluation, not through the narcissist making a deliberate choice to treat the person better, through the involuntary, genuine, effectively real experience of caring about the impact of the devaluation on someone whose experience of being hurt has become, through the alchemy of genuine love, genuinely threatening to the narcissist's own psychological equilibrium. The devaluation of someone you genuinely love produces a quality of internal dissonance that the devaluation of someone you do not love simply does not generate. And that dissonance, however incompletely it is processed, however inadequately it is expressed, is what keeps pulling the cycle back from its own momentum. We have established that genuine love disrupts the narcissist's performance of imperviousness and interrupts the mechanical momentum of the devaluation cycle. And now I want to examine something that operates in a completely different dimension from both of those disruptions, something that is not about what happens in the narcissist's behavior toward the person they love, but about what happens in their behavior toward everyone else. Because one of the most diagnostically precise and most personal significant signs of genuine narcissistic love is not visible in the relationship itself. It is visible in what the relationship does to every other relational engagement in the narcissist's life. The full presence disappears everywhere else, and I want to develop this with the precision it deserves, because what I am describing is a specific and highly revealing psychological phenomenon that is, once you understand its mechanism, one of the clearest available indicators of whether genuine love is present in a narcissistic relationship, or whether the investment remains primarily at the transactional level that characterizes most narcissistic relational engagement. Here is the foundational principle: the human capacity for genuine relational presence for the specific quality of full, invested, genuinely engaged attention that makes another person feel truly seen and truly encountered, rather than simply interacted with, is not an unlimited resource. It is, like every other dimension of psychological functioning, a finite capacity whose availability at any given moment reflects the current demands being made on it across all of the contexts in which it is being deployed. When significant portions of that capacity are consumed by a particular relational engagement, when a significant investment of genuine psychological presence is being made in one specific direction, what remains available for other relational engagements is correspondingly reduced. The neuroscientist Michael Posner, whose foundational work on attentional systems showed us how the brain's capacity for directed, sustained, genuinely engaged attention operates as a limited resource that can be allocated but not multiplied, gives us the neurological framework for understanding what genuine narcissistic love does to the narcissist's capacity for full presence elsewhere. What Posner's research demonstrated is that genuine attentional investment, the specific, deep, effectively engaged quality of attention that genuine caring about another person produces, consumes neural resources that are then unavailable for equivalent investment in other directions. For the narcissist, whose psychological architecture typically allows them to distribute a relatively surface-level, impression-managed quality of attention across multiple relational contexts with considerable efficiency, maintaining the performance of engagement in many relationships simultaneously, without genuine investment in any of them consuming sufficient resource to compromise the performance elsewhere. Genuine love introduces a specific and functionally significant disruption to this efficiency. Because genuine love generates genuine attentional investment, real, deep, neurologically substantial engagement with another person's reality that consumes the psychological resource that genuine presence requires. And that consumption occurring continuously, as genuine love does, rather than in the discrete, manageable, voluntarily allocated increments that strategic relational engagement produces, leaves narcissist with a specifically reduced capacity for genuine presence in every other relational context. The philosopher and theologian Simone Weil described what she called attention in its purest form as the capacity to give another person one's full, unhurried, genuinely receptive presence to suspend the ordinary self-referential activity of the mind and allow another person's reality to be fully received. Weil argued that this quality of genuine attention is among the rarest and most valuable things on earth. A human being can offer another, and among the most psychologically demanding, because it requires the temporary suspension of the self's ordinary priority over its own internal activity. What genuine narcissistic love produces is precisely this quality of Weil's attention, involuntary, unmanaged, consuming in relation to the person loved, and its consumption of the attentional resource is sufficiently complete that what remains for everyone else carries, to the perceptive observer, a quality of comparative absence that reveals, through its very contrast with the narcissist's ordinary relational efficiency, that something genuinely different is happening in the specific relationship where the attention is being genuinely consumed. We have traced 3 dimensions of what genuine love does to the narcissist's ordinary psychological functioning: the disruption of imperviousness, the interruption of the devaluation cycle, and the consumption of genuine attentional presence that leaves insufficient resource for full engagement elsewhere. And now, I want to examine something that operates in what I believe is the most intimate and most psychologically revealing territory we have visited. Today, something that does not concern the narcissist's behavior toward you while you are present, but something that concerns their internal experience when you are not, the absence that cannot be processed. And I want to begin by establishing what the narcissist's ordinary relationship with absence actually looks like, because the contrast between that ordinary relationship and what genuine love produces is itself the most precise diagnostic available for whether genuine love is present or whether the investment remains at the transactional level that characterizes most of the narcissist's significant relationships. The narcissist who is operating in supply mode, who is relating to the people in their life primarily through the transactional logic of supply acquisition and relational utility, demonstrates, when those people become unavailable, a specific and recognizable quality of psychological response. It is not indifference, exactly. There is some degree of disruption. The supply disruption requires management. Alternative sources require identification and engagement. The relational gap requires some degree of practical navigation. But the disruption is fundamentally major, nagable. It does not reach the level of genuine psychological dysregulation. It does not produce the specific, person-shaped quality of absence that genuine attachment to a specific, irreplaceable individual generates when that individual is not present. The psychologist John Cacioppo, whose foundational neuroscience research on loneliness and social connection showed us how the brain responds to the absence of significant social connection with a specificity and an intensity that reflects the depth of the connection's importance to psychological functioning, identified something directly relevant to what we are examining. Cacioppo found that the experience of genuine social absence, the felt reality of a specific, significant person being unavailable, rather than simply the abstract awareness of their non-presence, activates the brain's threat detection and stress response systems with an intensity that reflects not simply the loss of pleasant company, but the disruption of something that the brain's social architecture has integrated into its fundamental regulatory functioning. For the narcissist, whose psychological architecture typically prevents the depth of integration that Cacioppo's research describes, whose relational investments are sufficiently surface level that their absence does not reach the level of the brain's fundamental regulatory systems, this integration does not ordinarily occur. Absence is managed. Supply sources are replaced. The psychological system maintains its equilibrium through the efficiency of redirection, rather than through the more demanding process of genuine mourning and genuine integration of significant loss. But when genuine love is present, when another person has achieved the specific depth of neurological and psychological integration that genuine love produces, their absence cannot be processed through the ordinary mechanisms of supply management and relational redirection. Because what is absent is not simply a supply source. It is a person who has become, through the specific alchemy of genuine love, structurally integrated into the narcissist's psychological functioning in ways that their considerable management capacity simply cannot reach and cannot compensate for. The philosopher Martin Heidegger, whose analysis of what he called being with, the fundamental human condition of existing, not as isolated individually, dual consciousnesses, but as beings whose very mode of existence is irreducibly relational, described the experience of the significant other's absence as something that does not produce empty space, but rather a specific, present, weighted quality of absence that has its own distinct phenomenological character. The person is not simply not there. Their not being there is itself a form of presence, a felt, weighted, psychologically substantial reality that occupies the relational space their actual presence would have filled. This is precisely what genuine narcissistic love produces when the person loved is absent. Not neutral emptiness, not manageable supply disruption. The specific, weighted, essentially unresolvable presence of a particular person's particular absence, a presence of absence so distinct and so substantial that the narcissist's ordinary redirection mechanisms find nothing to redirect, because what is missing is not a function but a person, and persons cannot be substituted any more than they can be forgotten. We have now traced 4 dimensions of what genuine love does to the narcissist's ordinary psychological functioning: the fractured imperviousness, the interrupted devaluation cycle, the consumed attentional presence, and the unprocessable absence that no supply management can resolve. And now I want to examine something that operates not in the dramatic behavioral territory of cycles and disruptions and structural failures, but in something considerably quieter, considerably more intimate, and considerably more physically immediate than any of those phenomena: the softening. And I want to approach this carefully, because the involuntary softening that genuine love produces in the narcissist is perhaps the most easily dismissed and most frequently misread sign we will examine today. It is easily dismissed because it appears in moments, rather than patterns in brief, specific, often quickly suppressed instances that do not sustain themselves long enough to be easily verified or consistently observed. And it is frequently misread because it resembles, in its surface presentation, the performed warmth of the idealization phase, the strategic attentiveness and apparent openness that the narcissist deploys with deliberate intention in the early stages of supply acquisition. But the resemblance is superficial, and the distinction between that is, once you know what to look for, perceptible with a clarity that no amount of confusion between the two can ultimately sustain. Here is what distinguishes the involuntary softening of genuine love from the performed warmth of strategic idealization. The performed warmth is always, at some level, directed. It has an audience. It is calibrated consciously or unconsciously for the impression it produces in the person receiving it, and it carries in its quality of presentation the specific, barely detectable signature of something that is being offered for effect, rather than simply expressed because it cannot be contained. The narcissist in idealization mode is performing warmth, and performance, however convincing, carries the specific quality of something that exists in the relational space between the performer and the audience, rather than something that originates from an unguarded interior. The involuntary softening of genuine love has no audience. It does not calculate its effect. It does not originate in the relational space between self and other, but in something considerably more interior and considerably less accessible to the narcissist's considerable management circa capacity. It is the false self's defensive musculature, physical and psychological, momentarily relaxing in response to the presence of someone whose significance has penetrated beneath the level where that musculature ordinarily operates with reliable efficiency. The somatic psychologist Peter Levine, whose foundational work on trauma and the body showed us how the nervous system holds its most essential regulatory information, not in the narrative mind, but in the body's patterns of tension, movement, and breath, gives us the framework for understanding what the narcissist's physical softening actually represents. What Levine's research demonstrated is that the body's held tension, its chronic patterns of muscular bracing, postural contraction, and breath restriction is not simply a physical phenomenon. It is the body's record of its own history of threat and self-protection. Every significant experience of having needed to be defended against the world leaves a specific somatic imprint, a held pattern of physical readiness for the defensive response that the experience required. The narcissist's physical and psychological imperviousness is held in precisely this somatic architecture. In the specific, chronic, deeply conditioned patterns of bodily tension that reflect a lifetime of having needed to remain defended against the specific form of vulnerability that genuine closeness produces. And when that architecture momentarily releases, when the specific quality of another person's presence penetrates sufficiently beneath the level of conscious defensive management to reach the somatic layer where the defense itself is held, what becomes visible is something that no performance has ever produced and no strategic warmth has ever generated. The genuine self, briefly, incompletely, immediately retreated from, but unmistakably, in that moment, present, we have moved through 5 dimensions of what genuine love does to the narcissist's ordinary psychological functioning: the fractured imperviousness, the interrupted devaluation, the consumed attentional presence, the unprocessable absence, and the involuntary softening that reveals the genuine self beneath the armor. And now, I want to examine something that operates at a level of psychological intimacy that distinguishes it from everything we have discussed so far. Something that does not concern the narc. Is its behavior in the relationship, or their response to your presence or absence, but something that concerns their internal experience of the love itself, what it feels like from the inside, to be a narcissist who has encountered something they cannot replicate with anyone else, and who knows, however unwillingly and however incompletely, that they know it, the irreplaceability, and the specific, deeply uncomfortable awareness of it. And I want to begin with something that I think is genuinely important to establish before we examine this awareness in any depth. The narcissist's ordinary relational experience does not include this quality of irreplaceability. Not because the narcissist is constitutionally incapable of feeling it. What we are examining today is predicated on the reality that they are not, but because the ordinary conditions of narcissistic relational investment do not produce it. The supply economy of the narcissistic relational system is, by its fundamental design, a fungibility economy. People are valued for what they provide. And what they provide, the validation, the attention, the admiration, the sense of relational control, is not, in its essential nature, person-specific. It is category-specific. Different people can provide it. The specific person providing it matters less than the adequacy of the provision. This fungibility is not experienced by the narcissist as a limitation. It is experienced, in the context of their ordinary relational life, as a form of freedom. The freedom of someone who is not at genuine risk of irrecoverable loss, because what they value can, in principle, always be found elsewhere. The relational economy remains functional, regardless of which specific people are participating in it at any given time. Genuine love shatters this fungibility completely, and the shattering is not gradual. It is not a slow erosion of the substitutability that characterized previous relational investments. It is a sudden, complete, and essentially irreversible discovery that the specific quality of what is experienced in relation to this particular person is not a category of experience that other people can provide. It is a specific experience that is produced by the specific combination of this person's particular qualities, this person's particular presence, and the particular resonance that the narcissist's own inner world D produces in genuine contact with this specific other. The philosopher Gabriel Marcel, whose existential philosophy drew a fundamental distinction between what he called the problematic and the mysterious, between what can be solved by finding the right solution and what can only be inhabited because it exceeds any solution, gives us the framework for understanding what genuine narcissistic love introduces into the narcissist's experience of their own relational life. What Marcel showed us is that genuine love belongs to the category of mystery rather than problem. It cannot be resolved through substitution or management or the application of sufficient strategic intelligence, because it is not a problem that the right solution would address. It is a reality that the self must inhabit without the comfort of knowing that an equivalent alternative exists. The narcissist who is truly in love has stumbled, without preparation and without the psychological infrastructure to navigate it gracefully, into precisely this territory of Marcel's mystery. They know not as an intellectual conclusion, but as a felt, somatic, essentially undeniable reality that what they have found is not replaceable, that the search for an equivalent, however determined and however extensively pursued, will not produce one. And this knowledge, in the context of a psychology organized entirely around the maintenance of relational fungibility as a protection against genuine loss, is not simply uncomfortable. It is the most frightening thing they have ever been required to know. We have now moved through 6 dimensions of what genuine love does to the narcissist's ordinary psychological functioning, and each dimension has revealed a different facet of the same fundamental truth. That genuine love, in the narcissistic psychology, does not simply add feeling to an otherwise unchanged system. It disrupts the system. It introduces into every layer of the narcissist's carefully managed relational architecture a quality of genuine, unmanaged, essentially uncontrollable presence that the system was not designed to accommodate and cannot fully suppress. And now, I want to examine the disruption that I believe is, in terms of its implications for the person on the receiving end of the narcissist's love, the most practically significant and the most personally meaningful of everything we have. Lord. The disruption of the most reliable and most thoroughly conditioned of all the narcissist's relational behaviors, the honesty that love produces. And I want to be extraordinarily careful about how I frame this, because I am not suggesting that genuine narcissistic love makes the narcissist honest. It does not. The deception continues. The management of impression persists. The strategic deployment of partial truth in the service of relational control remains a behavioral constant that genuine love does not eliminate, and does not, in the ordinary course of the relationship's navigation, even significantly reduce in frequency or sophistication. What genuine love does is something considerably more subtle and considerably more significant than the simple replacement of dishonesty with honesty. It introduces into the dishonesty a specific quality of friction, a persistent, involuntary, effectively grounded resistance to the complete and comfortable execution of strategic deception in the presence of someone whose genuine significance makes the deception genuinely costly in a way that deception toward non-significant others simply is not. The developmental neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, whose somatic marker hypothesis showed us how the body's accumulated emotional record participates in decision-making and behavioral generation at a level that precedes and often overrides the rational mind's deliberate choices, gives us the framework for understanding how genuine love produces this specific quality of friction in the narcissist's conditioned dishonesty. What Damasio demonstrated is that emotional significance, the specific quality of caring about another person's reality and well-being that genuine love generates, produces somatic markers that are activated whenever behavior threatens to harm the person who carries that significance. These markers are not simply abstract moral discomfort. They are physiologically real, felt in the body with a specificity and a persistence that the rational management system must actively work against, rather than simply ignore. For the narcissist whose conditioned dishonesty toward non-significant others operates in the relative absence of these somatic markers, whose strategic deception of people who do not carry genuine significance produces minimal physiological friction and requires minimal suppressive effort. The introduction of genuine love into the relational equation changes the somatic landscape of deception in ways that are both functionally significant and behaviorally visible. The lying towards someone they genuinely love activates Damasio's somatic markers in ways that lying toward less significant others does not, and the activation of those markers, however incompletely processed, however inadequately expressed, however thoroughly the narcissist's conditioned behavior attempts to override their influence, produces the specific quality of friction that genuine love introduces into the conditioned dishonesty. Moments where what is being said contains more of what is actually felt than the strategic management of the communication intended. Fragments of involuntary truth that surface before the suppression system can intercept them. The specific quality of partial honesty that is not chosen but that happens as a consequence of the somatic markers, resistance to the complete and comfortable execution of deception towards someone who has become genuinely important. This is not confession. It is not the breakthrough of genuine vulnerability that the relationship deserves, and that genuine love in a psychologically healthy person would naturally produce. It is something considerably more limited and considerably more ambiguous than that, but it is real. And in the context of a psychology where complete and comfortable dishonesty toward significant others has been the behavioral standard, the appearance of even partial, involuntary, friction-generating honesty is itself a significant and revealing departure from the norm.